Best punter you've ever coached, and you can't say Reggie Roby.
That's easy. I had a guy named Mike Cyphers who was at Western Illinois, and I'll tell you a quick story about Mike. He punted 12 years, I believe it was, for the San Diego Chargers. He was a great punter. He was also the holder for Nate Kading on PATs and field
Okay.
goals. And Mike, incidentally, also could kick. He had a 54-yarder to beat Northern Iowa in the Dome and win
Wow.
us a conference championship 1 year. 56 yards, I think it was, the more I think about it. And the amazing thing was he didn't even kick until that game. He didn't kick the previous week, but our starting kicker was out with the flu, and Mike went in, and after the game, they asked me, they said, what would make you think your punter could hit a 56-yard field goal? And I said, well, he was hitting them from 60 in pregame. So I know it sounds silly, but I didn't think for a second that he wasn't going to make it because it's Mike Cyphers. Rest of the story on Mike Cyphers. Mike Cyphers led 1AA football in punting, and his senior year, I remember asking our sports information director, I said, do me a favor, go back and look at all of Mike's punts, except only record the average if he's on the other side of the 50. In other words, he's got a long field. And he came back later and he said, Coach Mike's average was 52.0. And I said, that's what I thought. He really is a better punter than Roby. Reggie Roby to this day has the NCAA record. It's 49.8. But here's the dirty little secret. Reggie didn't pooch punt. Reggie always had a long field back in those days. And when I told the sports information guy this, he said, well, we can publicize Mike then as the best punter in the history of college football. And I said, no, we really can't do that because we only punted 4 times a game. And one of those, on average per game, was a pooch punt. So Mike wouldn't have even had enough punts to qualify, except for the fact that he also pooch punted. Here's how good Mike Cyphers was as an NFL punter. 1 year in the playoffs, after the game, no less than Peyton Manning said, we lost to the Chargers today because of Mike Cyphers. Now, what a great compliment to an NFL punter. You don't hear too many Hall of Fame quarterbacks saying that they lost because of the other team's punter. That's how good Mike was.
And Joseph Walters, that kind of leads into this question from Joseph Walters. How about that punter, though? So he's referring to Tory Taylor. How good is Tory Taylor? I mean, stacking him up against Mike and against Reggie. I know it was small sample size, but here's a kid who's just brand new to the game of football. I think that's just a tremendous story, and his age is kind of an interesting tidbit as well. What are your thoughts on Tory?
Well, he is mechanically advantaged, what I would say. He's got a long leg. Both Reggie Roby and Mike Cyphers had long limbs. It does help a little bit. Of course, I'm not a great fan of rugby punters. I know that's the new thing now is rugby punters. The only problem I have with it, what I wish, and I know that our punter's working on it to some degree. Last year, if I'm not mistaken, he punted 40 times, 39 of which were rugby punts. I think only once did he have a conventional punt. And I would simply, when I heard that he was practicing more on the traditional punt as well, be able to do both. I like that idea because if you can spin the ball like Reggie Roby or Mike Cyphers and have a good strong leg, as our punter does have, then you can be more than capable with the traditional punts. And now you can also rugby punt at times. And now you have that uncertainty about which kind of punt you're going to see. And of course, if you're rugby punting all the time, some people might try to engineer a punt rush to get to that spot in a rugby punt. And typically, if you're right-footed, of course, you're moving to the right as you punt the ball. And of course, your block point, you're going to engineer your rush so that you try to get to that block point that's also offset to that same side. So if sometime you're going to step in the traditional sense straight ahead to punt the ball, and sometimes you're going to move to the right as a right-footed punter would in a rugby punt, I think it could give you a little advantage that you might show up with either type of punt.
And I don't know what your background, Don, is with Australian punters. And of course, I think seems like Australia is being more heavily recruited now than it was probably. Was it recruited at all, really, back in the
No,
80s and 90s?
no, not back
So,
then.
what do you know as far as players from Australia being able to develop into having a leg that can kick or traditional, I want to say American style punt as opposed to rugby punt? Is there good data to back that up?
To be honest with you, I'm not sure that any of them have really become very accomplished with the traditional punting style. Maybe long term, our punter can get that done. He certainly talked about it. He talked about being able to be proficient also as a traditional punter. And I thought that was a good idea because he'd probably be the only Australian punter that could do both. That might make him even more marketable to the NFL. I think it probably would. The other thing that comes to mind for me about rugby punts, I know as a head coach, we saw some rugby punts even when I was at Western Illinois. And a better example would be remember when Tim Dwight was a punt returner? People decided, it wasn't rugby punts, but they decided we're going to simply punt the ball away from Tim Dwight.
No.
I do recall, and I flash back now to the Peach Bowl, 1982, Coach Fry very logically said, Reggie, you're the best punter in college football, but I'm going to ask you every time to get the punt off the field. The reason is Tennessee had a guy named Willie Guy. Not Willie Guy. What am I thinking? Willie Galt. Remember Willie Galt?
Okay.
Willie Guy played for us, of course. Willie Galt, and he was one of the fastest humans playing football. He was a very electric punt returner. And at the end of that Peach Bowl, one of the reasons we won the game is Willie Galt hadn't returned a punt yet because Reggie got the ball off the field every time. So, going forward, the thing that comes to mind for me, that year when Tim was I think he led the Big Ten maybe in returns even as a freshman. And at some point in time, they decided to punt the ball away from Tim. Well, we took another good punt returner by the name of Tony Collins and put Tony back there. And now, with them being able to cover the field, you couldn't punt the ball away from both of them. And people then decided, I know what we'll do. We'll still punt the ball away from Tim Dwight because Collins is not as good a returner. The only problem with that, Tony was an accomplished punt returner too. And if you punted it to him, you only had a demon like Tim Dwight that was blocking for him. And Tim would decapitate you as you came downfield. If you're looking up for the ball, Tim Dwight's helmet's going to be right under your chin. And Tim used to take great pride in being able to be an effective blocker. I believe that year Tony Collins' average might have been better than Tim's, simply because we countered the fact that people were going to try to punt the ball away from a single returner.
Right.
So the thing I don't like about rugby punts, let's face it, if they're fielded on the fly, sometimes they can come right back at you because there's no hang time involved in so many cases. And the best way to be able to get that accomplished, of course, is to put another returner back there. And now if they want to punt to the wide field, they risk our guy being able to field it on the fly. That gives you a chance, of course, to run through the coverage before the coverage really has a chance to collapse on the ball.